to come away from these discussions with a deeper understanding of not only your own perspectives, but also other people's. It is hard to find sustainable solutions, but we find that discussion is a good place to start. So before we begin, I would like to remind the audience that this discussion is being recorded and will be available on YouTube after the meeting. It is up to you if you would like to share your screen. You can turn it on and off by clicking the video camera at the bottom left of the screen. You can also mute and unmute your microphone by clicking the microphone button. We ask that you keep your microphone muted unless you are speaking or getting ready to speak. Our moderators will prompt and guide the discussion throughout the evening by asking the audience questions. Throughout the discussion, you are welcome to share your thoughts out loud through the group chat located at the bottom of the screen, or just sit back and listen. Feel free to enter the conversation as you would like. The moderator does not need to call on people in order to speak. However, you may raise your hand if it is more comfortable for you to enter the conversation. And please be respectful of others throughout the conversation. So tonight we would like to start off with our conversation with the question of, what does sustainability mean for you?
I guess having the least impact on, can I just talk? Okay, I don't see anything. Okay. Just having the least negative impact on the earth that you can, because we know that individuals have a negative impact. We have lots of waste and trash, and it's really hard not to. So yeah, trying to minimize that.
I think the term kind of like speaks for itself. I mean, it does say like sustain. So like, I think it means just like making sure that future generations will have an earth that's fit to live on in the future. And, you know, it will go on and exist past us, and now we won't be the ones to like destroy it and everything. I think just like making sure that, you know, we aren't like the last generation, or like we won't be the ones to like destroy the earth, kind of.
I guess kind of going off of that, when you're saying that it's kind of like a self-defined word, just kind of looking at it, it sort of is like something that can last for a long period of time. It can sustain itself. You don't need to have any outside influences in order to keep it going. You know, like, I don't know, driving a car, you know, aside from fossil fuels, but like it's not sustainable because you have to keep inputting that fuel into the car. It's not like a perpetual motion device, you know. It's not going to keep going without the outside influence, which I think is interesting. Then you can look at the system, like what are the bounds of your system? You want to talk about like within your house, like do you want to be a self-sustaining house, or your country, or the world? You know, like what scale do you want to look at sustainability on?
I was gonna say something similar, Catherine, like just in terms of like a sustainable household, like trying to like reuse clothes so you don't rely on other people to provide, trying to grow your own food. That way you like know where it's coming from, and it's not like, doesn't have like necessarily a negative impact on the earth. Yeah, I was just gonna say the same thing.
I guess like sustainability can like sort of differ from like ideas about like self-sufficiency, because like with sustainability, like you want to sort of like focus on making the world like collectively like a better place or something like that, or like bringing other people into like making things more equitable, and like Shannon said, just like having like less of a negative impact on the world and people around you. So yeah, and like it's something that to make change, like we can only like do it together, I guess.
So Laura brings up this idea of equity. So sustainability has three main components. Usually people refer to like social, environmental, and economic. So how do these three factors under this umbrella term of sustainability overlap with each other or relate to each other?
Can you write the three things in the chat? My brain is working very slowly right now. The first thing that kind of comes to my mind is just kind of like the broad connection that like your place in society kind of like dictates your economic state too, and sustainability is kind of an expensive thing just on how our society is set up. So, you know, if you need to get cheaper food, then you're probably gonna have to get it somewhere that's less sustainable. Whereas like if you have more money because you're somewhere else in society, then you could go to like a farmer's market and get a food that's sustainably grown. So it's like people have different access to sustainability.
I also think they're kind of related because you know, there's certain groups that are more affected by environmental problems, like socioeconomic groups that are more impacted by it. And so, like, I think also, um, like, I've seen stuff about like clean energy and like different ways for that that would provide more jobs. So that's kind of related too, I guess. It's like my two things.
Yeah, a lot of the like kind of like you're saying, a lot of the countries in the global north got their wealth from like not using sustainable energy, and then now they're telling other countries to stop it because that's not good for the earth. But then like now they don't have the same like ways to get money that, you know, countries in the global north did, and like countries in the global north are still using like not sustainable energy. So
I feel like going off of that, it kind of makes it the economic responsibility of these developed countries to provide or help leapfrog technology from our country to theirs, so they can both have a lot of energy accessible to their society, but then have it in a clean way. And that would be kind of an economic burden, I guess, on developed countries, but it would be for us to provide for social justice in their area, so those people all have the same opportunities that, you know, our previous generations had. I guess I was also thinking that the relationship between all three of these is not a simple one. So it's like you might be able to afford more green goods if you have a lot of wealth, but if you have a lot of wealth, you might have a larger house, which uses more resources to maintain. And that's just one example, but the relationship between each of these is probably extremely complicated in both like positive and negative ways.
Yeah, I definitely noticed that some sustainable stuff that you can do saves money. Like, I don't know if I can think of an example, but like buying less of certain things, but then some things cost more money and there's less access to things that are sustainable.
Yeah, I think like especially with like sustainable energy, if you want it for yourself, it's really expensive in like the upfront costs, but like not everybody has enough money to be able to pay for it right then and there when it like pays off eventually, like with it being cheaper in the long run.
So I've heard this word access being used a lot. So how can we make sustainability more access to all people? And what does access to sustainability mean? What does that look like?
I think there need to be cheaper options on the market for some products. Like maybe new companies could help with that. And also maybe government regulations somehow could help with making sure companies are sustainable, even if they have cheap products.
I agree. And if the more sustainable option is cheaper, then people will probably go with that option, even if they don't really think about sustainability.
I think like kind of what Shannon was bringing up, like if there are more companies that choose to make sustainable goods, then the demand, like economically, the demand will go down or the demand will go up. So then the price will go down. So it'll just be like a lot cheaper if more companies were to like, I mean, I guess it would be kind of capitalism, but if it's more sustainable, I guess it works then.
I think another way that sustainability can be like more accessible for people is through like transportation. They talk about like using cars and airplanes. Like there's a lot of carbon emissions from that, and so like for there to be like a cleaner version of public transportation that's accessible to everybody, like high-speed trains and stuff like that. That would be like everyone could use that, and it would cut down a lot on like carbon emissions from other forms of transportation.
I think a big part of this is convenience, and that a lot of times it's not convenient always to do the sustainable option. And even sometimes if it is, a lot of times it's a habit that's already ingrained in people to do it a certain way, and it's difficult for them to change that habit.
I think going off of that, it's like, how can we input the infrastructure so it is the most convenient option to do the most sustainable thing for everyone, no matter your socioeconomic background? I think that's a big question, and I don't know if anyone has the answer.
I kind of forgot what I was gonna say, but anyway, so like I think one thing, like you guys talked about, like is like price is like something to sort of do with it. Like I guess like we don't all have like the means to just like go live in tiny houses. If that would be the best thing. Um, because I was talking to one of my on a personal level, I was talking to one of my sisters, and she was like, "Oh, like I want like better shampoo that like won't be as bad for me, but like it's also like more expensive." And then my dad is like really big into collecting cans because like if you bring in, if you get paid so much like per can, and I was like, "What like?" I was like, "Have you thought about like also picking up trash while you're doing that?" And he was like, "Well, like I don't get paid for doing that." And I'm just like, "But it would be a nice thing to do." So yeah.
So we've touched on this a bit in a lot of different ways, talking about like more Western or the global North or developed nations like the US having that economic responsibility to perhaps help other countries achieve the same level of affluence or a similar level of affluence through a cleaner way than like we did. That kind of reminds me of like the cap and trade system of like there's so much pollution that's able to be emitted, and like some companies have more resources to do so, so they may lower it past the regulation to then be able to sell more to other companies. So, and we talked about in a couple other ways, but who do you think the responsibility lies on to create a more sustainable society that we live in? Is it more like government? Is it more on the individual level? Is it a combination of both or neither?
I think a lot of it should be the government and also companies. I guess the government's job is to regulate companies, make sure they're not being too bad for the environment, hopefully. And also, if responsibility is placed on the consumer, it's really, I don't think we can do that because there really aren't a lot of options or cheap options for a lot of things. So we need change at a higher level if the consumer is even able to easily be more sustainable.
Yeah, and I think this relates back to the accessibility in the sense that for those who can't think about sustainability at the personal level, it's up to the government and those who can spend their time doing things like that and have the time to do that.
I agree. I think the governments with the most doing in not third world countries like the US and China have like a big responsibility to do sustainable things because they can. And third world countries don't have the time and they're growing their economies and stuff. And also like businesses that have a lot of money and are able to set an example or do things with their money that are sustainable have a responsibility.
You said bigger countries like the US and China. I think you mean because they have more money.
Yeah.
Are able to, they could, if they wanted to, be more sustainable.
I think that could probably even be expanded to like a personal or a family level. People who like individually have more money, I think they have more opportunity to help others and help promote this sustainability. I mean, I always think about the example of solar panels. Originally, they were unbelievably expensive. They seemed ridiculous. They would never come to fruition economically. They would never be viable. But wealthy people invested in the technology and slowly the cost was able to come down. But we needed those people who had that privilege of economic wealth in order to help bring that technology and bring it more accessible to people from, lower income households.
And going off of that, the technology needs to be more like desirable by the consumer as opposed to the competitor in order for the businesses to really push it forward.
And I think it's also like not being sustainable is really the only option for some people. So it's like the only option is to get like coal energy from like your energy provider, or like your only option is to get is to use like plastic bags from the grocery store and stuff like that. So I think it's on both the government and the companies.
I think also if we're looking at like sustainability on like an individual level or like a household level, I think education plays a big role in it. Because I think a lot of people don't understand like how their choices affect like the environment long term, and so they don't even think about like the other options. They just see that everybody else is kind of making the same choices, and so they go with it and assume that it's fine. And so maybe kind of like educating people on like what their actions are actually doing and how they're affecting like the environment and other people can kind of help change like the norms.
I also think that change should be at a higher level because that would make way more of a difference than individual changes. Like maybe banning plastic bags at grocery stores, or making people pay for them when they buy groceries so that they bring their own reusable bag. So I noticed that activists a lot of times focus on trying to convince individuals to change their habits, which makes small changes. And I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of people focusing on trying to get the government and companies to change their practices, but I think that is where we need to focus more on because it can make a way bigger change.
I'm glad you mentioned the plastic bags because I'm pretty sure at least Hawaii, some parts of Hawaii have actually started doing that, and I believe the whole state wants to have that happen in, I want to say, next 3 to 5 years. I'm not sure if any other state has followed suit with that, but it's worth mentioning.
In terms of government,
Go ahead, Katie. No.
I was just gonna say, in terms of governments making changes to people's like how convenient something is, it's like, again, it's either the infrastructure or maybe they should even create like a propaganda campaign, you know, to encourage the idea, like through advertising and like making it seem like a appealing lifestyle.
That's kind of like what I was gonna say. Shannon mentioned like we need maybe more of a combined effort of people to get government and like companies to change. And I think part of the problem is that like fossil fuel companies have a lot of money, so they're able to like use that money to influence government and like people who make decisions, whereas like environmental activists, I mean, yes, there's like groups like the Sierra Club or NRDC who like have a lot of influence, but I think part of the problem is addressing like who has the power to influence decision makers.
I definitely agree. And it's hard to think of ways that you could solve that problem. Does anyone have any ideas?
There are politicians saying they won't like take money from corporations, that certain corporations. So that's one.
I know that like in Illinois, like last summer they like raised the gas tax or something like that. And like I don't know where the gas tax money went, to be honest. But like, you know, if like we had stuff like the gas tax, and I was like, maybe we could like use that to like fund like alternatives to like cars or whatever, or like other ways of transportation. And yeah.
So you mentioned a gas tax. Did I hear you correctly? Okay. thinking of like gas taxes or other things, I guess that leads me to the question in like the pursuit of creating a sustainable like world or society or country. Will we have to give up comforts or just change the comforts that we have, or would you be willing to sacrifice, and like how much would you be able to sacrifice right now if it is for a future pursuit of sustainability?
I mean, I guess like with my like proposition of like the gas tax is like also like complex like in and of itself because it's like more low income people like need um to have better public transportation, but then also like the people who like would benefit from cheaper gas would like also be poor people, um or low income people. Yeah. And then what else did you say?
Like what, like would you be able to um like would we have to give up comforts, or just like those comforts would look different?
I guess like it's like I'd like to think that like I'd be like comfortable like giving things up, but like and also like other people had to have like different level of comforts with like being able to change their comforts, you know. So I guess like I don't have like an answer.
I sorry, go ahead.
No, you can go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think like what I would be willing to give up, and I think like this goes for other people too, is like kind of the promise of change. And so like I gave up eating red meat, or I'm like trying to, and then when I tell people it's for like environmental reasons, they are like, well, that's not going to do anything, that's dumb. So like because they don't see how that's going to make like a real impact, they don't think it's worth it. So like if someone's proposing changes but you don't see like a high level commitment from a lot of people, then there's probably not going to be a lot of motivation to go through with it. I was going to say something else, but I think I forgot it, so someone else can go.
What I want to say about that is like whenever you try to convince anyone to do something like that, never start off by saying like they'll get the wrong idea. They'll think you're trying to push on them, like trying to become vegan or vegetarian. I would first recommend like alternative options, like instead of regular milk, try almond milk. Instead of giving up meat, try like veggie burgers, or at least like maybe go down to impossible meat. I feel like that's a good segue into that.
Oh, I don't try to like push, like I don't try and change people's diet. I just like explain why like I'm not, like I can't eat something that they're offering that day or something. Um, yeah, I like feel weird about trying to like convince other people to change their lifestyles, because I don't know, feels like it's not my place, but also like I don't know.
I think that's really good advice, a really good suggestion of how to actually change people's habits, because I read an article about how, yeah, like saying, oh, you should be vegan, that actually people are so like, they get angry about that sometimes, and like it just makes them feel like offended. So yeah, it's like, I don't know. That's a really good suggestion.
Something I was just thinking about comfort and sacrificing comfort. If you think about it in the social aspect or economic aspect, sacrifice is already being made by individuals. People sacrifice having good school systems for their kids to live in affordable communities, things like that. So I don't know where I was going with that, but I guess somehow, well, I guess those are factors to sustainability.
I think the question just becomes who's willing to make those sacrifices versus who has to make those sacrifices. And I think we just need more people who are willing to make sacrifices when they can, you know, when they're in a, again, economically stable point in their life, whatever that means to them.
I think that's also maybe where the role of the government and like not anything else, just the government comes in, because they could help make it so that everyone has access to like making those choices. I guess I don't know how that would happen, but I feel like that is like their role to make sure that not everyone like has to I don't know where I'm going with this, but like making it easier for everyone instead of like one group of people having to sacrifice a lot and then one group not having to, if that makes sense.
Maybe it's like how in California, like all the new houses need to have like solar panels on them. So like they're required to make that sacrifice. Like, I mean, that's not really a sacrifice to give up fossil fuels, but like they're forced to make that decision when buying their house.
That's really cool. Is that actually a thing? That's a law. Cool.
Yeah, in like any new built house in California, they need to like have solar panels, and I think for some of the buildings there, they need to be like retrofitted to be more sustainable too.
So I guess making this more of a reflective question, how do you think that your own personal background has shaped your sense of sustainability, whether that be social, economic, or environmental?
Well, me personally, I've grown up and lived near and actually worked at Indiana Dunes, so I really do enjoy it. Like, for me, it's kind of is personal. So that's my personal background.
I think people's background, you know, in relationship to sustainability, or like their background influences what aspect of sustainability maybe they focus on. So, for example, like I've grown up in an area where there's lots of parks and a prairie path trail and all sorts of things that are allow you to connect to the outdoors. But then maybe someone who lives in, I don't know, a city in a old industrial district, they might be more connected to the idea of sustainability in terms of like minimizing air pollutants or something like that. It's like what aspect of sustainability are you connected to definitely depends on where you come from and what you're exposed to, because it's hard to be passionate about something that you were never exposed to and you don't know about.
I don't think that like somebody's socioeconomic background like decides how they stand on sustainability, but I know for me, I've like been very privileged growing up, so I didn't really have to worry about the short-term things like feeding myself, clothing myself, all that stuff just kind of came. And so I've kind of had the freedom to explore, well, like how can I make better decisions? How can I make sustainable decisions? And then like actually go to school to like explore those. And so those are all freedoms that I don't think everybody necessarily has. I think just because of like restrictions that individuals might have, they may be more focused on the short-term goals.
I think going off of what Lily was saying, We went to, I saw a youth speaker, a youth environmental activist speaker, and she was saying how a lot of people in her community, which was a lower income community, don't feel safe, they don't have food, they don't have access to proper education. And so those are the things on the forefront of their mind. I think it's like the Maslow's hierarchy of needs or something like that, which is like you can only address things in a certain order. And first you need to have your basic needs met in order to be able to attack something that might be, bigger than yourself, such as different aspects of sustainability. And she was just saying we can't expect kids or adults to try to advocate for sustainability if they don't have their basic needs met. So I guess that's where like economics and the social side is coming in again too.
Yeah, I remember she also said that then the communities where people like don't have as much money and stuff, and there's like pollution, there's pollution there. There was also like a company like trying to take advantage of that and like dump waste there too. So that's like an environmental justice thing.
So we're talking a lot about sustainability and what that may mean to us and what that looks like. But how do we know when we have achieved sustainability, and like what are some of the end goals? Like what in your mind is like, once we get this, once we achieve this, this is when our society has become sustainable or more sustainable than before?
For me, I would say the goal, like we established a set goal, like whether it be a certain amount of people, our power now by like solar or wind power, whether we meet a certain quota to lower emissions in the air, whether we meet a certain power to like make sure deforestation is at a lower level. Like we set a goal and we reach it, and then if we possible, we can achieve a higher goal than that, depending on the progress of the work it took us to reach that first goal. To me, that's what like the progress and goal we meet is what's considered it to me.
Yeah, I think like on the governmental like level, it's um like being able to like say, okay, like spell out like this is where we want to get, or like this is how we need to like measure this, to like make sure that like people are like institutions are like being held accountable to get there. Because like I feel like sometimes I'm too pessimistic, but like you know with like things including the environment, it's like okay, don't do this, and then like they find like a loophole, and then they're like, okay, well also don't do that, like so yeah.
I agree, Laura. I think like there are ways you can like measure, kind of like George was talking about, like GHG emissions in the air and see, like how we're changing. But I think we should also put some focus on like making sure that we don't go back, we don't revert back to old habits. So place restrictions on like actions now, so that like in the future, after maybe the focus is not on sustainability anymore, people can't like quietly go back, can't quietly like start raising GHG emissions as like population rises or something.
I think also incentivizing those goals or metrics is a good thing. So that way when people do start focusing on another area, like you said, regulatory commissions won't have to be so, I guess, in businesses, like paying attention to what businesses are doing, because if the company is better off by following those restrictions due to incentives, then there's going to be less regulation that's required.
You asked when we will like be sustainable, when we can consider ourselves sustainable, and I think what we're all thinking why we're talking about sustainability is because, well, part of the reason is because we know there's a lot of things that our country and individuals could easily be doing, or not that difficult, like using renewable energy instead of what we use now, or like even individual decisions like using reusable bags. Most people don't do that. So I think we're thinking about how there's a lot of things that we actually could be doing that we're just like not doing. Like we're not making the choice to be sustainable in areas where we could, if that makes sense.
I don't remember which speech it was exactly, but kind of going off of that idea, I remember Greta giving some speeches saying basically like we're choosing to make the wrong decisions globally, you know, and I don't know where I was going with this, but just the idea that I guess like what do you like, how much do we actually get to choose? Like, do we already have the technology here to be a sustainable society, or is it you know, something that we still need to wait for in order to reach that ultimate goal of sustainability as a society?
So I'm currently in a environmental economics class, and we have been talking a lot about this idea of like intergenerational equity and like sustainability, the benefits, to talk in economic terms, accrue in the future, which means that us individually or us as a generation won't necessarily see those gains or those benefits and may be the ones taking all of the losses. So how do we deal with that fact, and how can we, even knowing that knowledge, I feel like a lot of people may struggle with like making those short-term economic losses or changes in their own lives difficult to make that decision. But how do we balance making those choices for people in the future and people now? I mean, because I don't think it's any secret that the U.S. in and of itself has a lot of inequalities and poverty and racism and our own issues that we need to deal with. So I guess my question is, how do we deal with the inequality that we face as a generation today, with also the inequality between generations in the terms of sustainability, and how our actions and our inactions will affect future generations, if that makes sense. Let me know if that doesn't. I'll try to reword that better.
I think it can be seen as a sacrifice, but also like there could be changes that aren't really that much of a sacrifice that we just need to make, like bring your own reusable stuff, if that were normal. That's not really that hard, but people just need to make that change. So it's kind of a very small sacrifice. But then there's other things that would be a bigger sacrifice. And like the Green New Deal could kind of make it into not so much a sacrifice, it'd be like a huge change, but maybe a lot of benefits could come with it too, like changing to renewable energy.
Something I thought of is that if one company makes a sacrifice to be more sustainable that makes them have a short-term loss, that they probably wouldn't be likely to start that by themselves when all the other companies are benefiting off of making a lot of pollution, like car companies. So if there's a regulation that all the companies change at the same time, that could be better, like the California car regulations for emissions.
This is sort of like what Shannon was saying, but I guess I've heard people say the climate change isn't something that's happening to us, it's happening for us, as in it opens up a door of opportunity, and we can use it to not only decrease greenhouse gas emissions, but to also decrease other injustices. So it's kind of changing the paradigm of how you want to look at the problem.
I think another thing could be if we think of ourselves as part of a society instead of just as an individual. So it's if I make this sacrifice for the society, it doesn't matter as much to myself because I'm bettering the society.
And I just want to clarify one thing I said. I mentioned the Green New Deal and how that could kind of make things that could be seen as huge sacrifices, like not using the forms of energy we use now into kind of benefits. So that would create a lot of jobs in renewable energy to kind of replace the jobs that are now for fossil fuels and all that.
Going sort of off of what Kate said. I think it's easier for people to run ad campaigns or whatever about individual decisions because America America kind of is individualistic. And so it doesn't go against the grain as much to be maybe you should recycle. So yeah.
I know, I feel like this pandemic has been very revealing that Americans do not like to sacrifice personal comfort for the good of the many. They don't love it.
I wonder how different cultures are going to play into how sustainable a country might be, because going back to the idea of doing it for the greater good rather than for yourself, I think a lot of East Asian countries really have the mindset of you are here to help better everyone, help your family, help your community, whereas in the US, like you guys were saying before, it is all about you, all about the individual. You want to give yourself the best opportunities, and maybe coronavirus, that's gotten in our way of helping the spread of it, but it also might be a barrier that we have to acknowledge going forward in fighting the climate crisis or other sustainability issues.
So we're talking about culture a little bit, and I feel like personally, I've never really acknowledged the importance of culture in these types of topics and against this and in work against climate change and inequalities and stuff like that. But I feel like I've gradually acknowledged the importance of culture, and I think that for example, it could be an important way of encouraging more people to be more sustainable. I think of in the 1950s and post World War II, there is a lot of media influence of oh, look at this this couple who has this nice 2-story house, and they have like 2 kids and a front lawn and a white picket fence. And so like that became like the American dream, the standard that everyone was trying to live up to. And I'm like, you know, I see more and more on Instagram, like people living in like vans and like tiny houses. And even though that's not super accessible to everyone, I think it's starting to like change that, like, I guess, narrative of like, oh, it's kind of like cool to be sustainable. So I guess my question is like, how do you think that like media and culture, and like, what are some examples that you think could be utilized in American culture for sure? Because I feel like we obviously don't have that I am because we are type of thinking that places us in a community. So yeah, what are some examples, or what ideas do you guys have in that general thought area idea?
I mean, this is kind of like a different conversation. But you know, like going back to like the influence of like social media, like all these like influencers are like, I gotta get this like huge house and things like that, and sort of like setting a standard for like everybody else, I guess. So yeah.
I think there's an age-old idea of you can't be what you can't see. And I know usually that's put in the idea of representation within different types of jobs or power structures. But I think it can be applied here too. You can't live a sustainable lifestyle if you don't know what that means, if you haven't seen someone else live that sustainable lifestyle. You know, if you see everyone living in 2-story houses with white picket fences, well, that's all you know, so that's what you're going to be chasing.
So a lot of people were talking about straws recently. So now I think a lot of people are like, oh, okay, I'll like not get a straw and then I'm being good for the environment. So I guess whatever people are talking about is like what people think they should do to be sustainable.
Yeah, I'm really curious to see how like the younger generation, like my younger sister is like, when I was talking to her like this summer, she was like, yeah, my dream isn't to have like a big house with a lot of money. I just want to like live in a small sustainable house. And I don't know if that's just like because she's related to me and I like talk about some of the environmental classes that I take, or if that's because like it like climate change is such a hot topic right now and they're learning about it at such a like a young age that like I never thought about any of that when I was her age. And so like growing up, if that's like on the forefront of her thoughts at such a young age, and then she grows up, I think that like she really is going to be making different choices. And she's like the same way, she doesn't use plastic straws, but again that could be because like we don't keep them in our house anymore and like all of her friends are doing it. But like I think we are seeing some cultural changes, like what's cool is kind of changing.
Yeah, and I think that social media helps normalize more of these aspects, so it's just easier for people to like just have that be part of their like routine, just to choose like more sustainable options.
Yeah, speaking of social media, I'm not sure if any of you guys remember or even heard this, but there was this very popular viral campaign launched last year by the YouTuber called Mr. Beast. He started a campaign to plant 20 million trees by the year 2020. I'm not sure if they actually reached their goal, but I do know they planted like several millions of trees at least. So that's another example of how social media can definitely influence people to do things like that, good things.
I think social media also makes it easier to like organize. I think about like the Fridays for Future like marches that happen all over the world, and like I'm pretty sure those started based on like social media, so I think that's a really good tool to use for like activist organizing.
Yeah, and I think social media, like you were saying, it doesn't just like help spread information, it helps like representation too. So it helps show people like what a sustainable lifestyle looks like, and it helps like get people connected with like those activists who like are like committed to this, so that they can learn and like have someone to look up to and have a model.
And I think it also helps diversify like the environmental movement, because like before it was like more popular, all you would see was like white girls being more sustainable, but now you can see just about anybody like have a social media account that is like has sustainable like options, or like yeah.
Yeah, I feel like in terms of access, this social media really, you know, like as long as you have like a smartphone, or even for like Instagram, if you have like a computer or access to internet, you pretty much have access to like a bunch of information and a bunch of people worldwide. And I feel like that's kind of what makes media different today than perhaps in the 1950s. You know, like people in the 1950s and up until pretty recently got most of their media from like television or like big organization, corporation like campaigns, whereas I feel like social media kind of brings that access and that control of media back to like the people. So like even if you know, like fossil fuel companies may have a bunch of money and a lot of influence in government, but like in terms of like social media, there's a lot of like ability there for activists and environmental aware people to create these movements and things like that, and to show people alternatives that may not be mainstream yet.
It almost seems like social media is like, if you think of media like a buffet, back in the 1950s, you only had a couple of options. You know, there's only a few stations on the TV and the radio, and now it's almost infinite. It's just, what do you want to try to focus on? There's no way to try to capture it all, but it gives you at least the opportunity to explore things that you wouldn't have been able to before.
All right, well, it is 6 p.m. Thank you so much for attending our first sustainable discussion. We greatly appreciate everyone's participation this evening, and we look forward to seeing you all, if you can make it next week, to our next discussion. So the next couple of weeks, we will be talking more in depth about each aspect of this sustainability that we talked about: social, economic, and environmental. So next week, we're going to start with environmental sustainability. So if nobody else has any thoughts or comments or questions, I will see you guys then, and I hope you have a great night and a great weekend.
Thank you.